The rain starts before you open your eyes. You hear it first. A low hiss across the canopy above the shelter, then the heavier percussion of drops hitting the hide stretched over the frame above your head. The fire from last night is still breathing. Barely. You pull the animal skin tighter around your shoulders and you do not move. You have nowhere to be. Not because you are lazy, because the rain has temporarily suspended the one thing that structures your entire day, the hunt. The foraging routes are muddy. The game has moved to cover. The routes you plan to dig are waterlogged and harder to find. For roughly 300,000 years of human prehistory, a rainy day was not a disruption to the schedule. It was the schedule, a built-in pause. And what your ancestors did with that pause tells us something surprising about who we actually are. Most people, when they imagine a prehistoric rainy day, imagine boredom, hunger, tension, people staring at the rain and waiting for it to stop. That image is almost completely wrong. What the archaeological and anthropological record shows is something far more interesting and far more familiar than you might expect. Start with the fire. Every rainy day in a hunter-gatherer camp began with the same first task, keeping the fire alive. Fire was not a convenience. It was the difference between warmth and hypothermia, between cooked food and spoiled meat, between light and total darkness after sunset. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner, who spent decades studying the Jew/Honsi San people of southern Africa, documented in careful detail what happened around the fire on days when outdoor activity was limited. The fire became the center of gravity for the entire group. People moved toward it. They sat closer together than usual. And they began to talk. Not about nothing, about everything. Wiesner's research, published in a landmark 2014 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that around daytime fires, roughly 34% of conversation was devoted to practical topics: food, resources, plans. But around evening and rainy day fires, when the pressure to be productive was lifted, that number dropped dramatically. More than 80% of conversation shifted to what she called social and imaginative content. Stories, speculation, the recounting of past events in vivid, narrative detail, jokes, teasing. The kind of conversation that builds and maintains the invisible architecture of a social group. Your ancestors were not bored on rainy days. They were doing the most fundamentally human thing possible. They were telling stories. And those stories were not entertainment in the way we use that word today. They were technology. Anthropologist Jerome Lewis, who has studied the Bayaka people of the Congo Basin, documented a specific category of storytelling he called mokondai. Sacred narrative performances that encoded information about the forest, about animal behavior, about the history of the group, about moral obligations between people. These stories were how knowledge moved across generations without writing. A rainy day was not a lost day of productivity. It was a transmission session, a living library being read aloud. Now think about what else was happening around that fire. Tool maintenance was constant. Stone tools, hand axes, scrapers, points, dulled with use and needed to be re-edged through a process called knapping. Striking the stone at precise angles to remove flakes and restore the cutting edge. Rainy days were when you caught up on this work. You sat close to the fire for light, you worked the stone with a hammerstone or a piece of bone, and you talked while you did it. Rope making was the same. Twisting plant fibers or strips of sinew into cordage was slow, tactile work that required attention but not silence. You could make rope and listen to a story at the same time. You could sharpen a point and argue about what went wrong on the last hunt. Archaeological sites preserve the evidence of this. At Blombo's Cave in South Africa, dated to approximately 75,000 years ago, researchers found engraved ochre pieces and shell beads, objects that required sustained, careful attention to create, and that had no immediate survival function. They were meaningful. They were made, the evidence suggests, during exactly the kind of slow, indoor time that rainy days provided. The cave was not just a shelter. It was a workshop, a studio, a place where your ancestors made things that mattered beyond the next meal. Let's reconstruct a specific afternoon. The rain is heavy now. 7 or 8 people are sheltered under a rock overhang or inside a rough hide-covered frame. Children are pressed against adults, not anxiously, but comfortably, the way children in every human culture press against warmth when it is available. An older woman is teaching a younger one how to weave a carrying basket from strips of bark, not with formal instruction. By doing it beside her, slowly, letting the younger woman's hands follow the pattern, a man is rehafting a spear point, binding a newly napped stone head to a wooden shaft with strips of wet sinew that will tighten and grip as they dry. Two adolescents are mock wrestling near the edge of the shelter, testing each other's limits, learning about strength and leverage and social hierarchy without any of those words. A child is being told a story about a lion. The story is probably not entirely true. That is the point. Nobody is staring at the rain, wishing it would stop. Here's the counterintuitive part. Modern research on cognitive restoration, the science of how human attention and mental energy recover after depletion, consistently finds that unstructured time, particularly time spent in low-stimulation social settings, is among the most effective forms of mental recovery known. Psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan developed attention restoration theory in the 1980s, showing that the brain's directed attention systems, the ones that allow us to focus, plan, and make decisions, recover fastest when we are engaged in effortless, non-demanding activity, watching a fire, listening to a story, doing repetitive handwork, being in nature. A rainy day in a hunter-gatherer camp was, from a neurological standpoint, almost perfectly designed for cognitive restoration. Your ancestors did not need to recover from rainy days. Rainy days were what they recovered with. The contrast with modern life is uncomfortable to look at directly. When it rains today, and you cannot go outside, the average person fills the gap with screens. Continuous, high-stimulation input that demands constant attention switching. Notifications, feeds, short videos, each one competing for the directed attention that the brain actually needs to rest from. The ancient rainy day gave the mind exactly what it needed to rebuild itself. The modern rainy day often does the opposite. There is also the matter of sleep. In hunter-gatherer groups studied by sleep researcher Jerome Siegel, particularly the Hadza of Tanzania, the Ju/Honzi San, and the Tsimane of Bolivia, napping was not considered laziness. It was a normal, socially accepted part of a day when outdoor activity was limited. On rainy days, the nap happened naturally and without guilt. You slept because your body wanted to sleep, because the sound of rain on hide is one of the most effective natural sleep inducers known to human neuroscience, and because resting now was a form of preparation for the hunting or foraging that the clearing skies would eventually demand. Rest was not the absence of productivity. It was productivity in a different currency. What does all of this mean for the way you spend a rainy day right now? Not much, practically. You cannot reconstruct a Paleolithic shelter in your apartment. You do not have sinew to twist or stone to nap. But something in you still knows what a rainy day is supposed to feel like. Something in your nervous system still responds to the sound of rain on glass, the way your ancestors responded to rain on hide, with a signal that says slow down, move toward warmth, move toward people, let the mind idle, let the hands do something simple, let someone tell you a story. The problem is not that we have forgotten how to spend a rainy day. The problem is that we have filled the space where that knowledge used to live with something that looks like rest but functions like the opposite. The rain starts before you open your eyes. You hear it first. And for one moment, before the phone lights up and the notifications begin, something ancient in you knows exactly what this day is supposed to be. This content is intended for educational and documentary purposes only. All references are drawn from peer-reviewed anthropological research and named academic sources.